Aisha had been looking forward to this day for weeks. She had spent years building her career in another city, working tirelessly, learning everything she could about management, business growth, and leadership. She had faced countless challenges, some of them so difficult that she had wondered if she could ever move forward. Yet here she was, back in the city where she grew up, ready to take the next big step in her professional journey. She had an important meeting scheduled at a well-known office that had a reputation for being both successful and old-fashioned. She arrived early, wanting to make a good impression. The building itself was impressive, with glass doors that reflected the morning sunlight and polished marble floors that shone even without anyone walking on them. The lobby was quiet, almost sterile, with a few people waiting in chairs, reading papers, or scrolling through their phones. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning products, and the soft hum of an air conditioner filled the space. Aisha took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her blazer and making sure she looked confident. She reminded herself that she had earned her place here, and no one could take that away. The first person she encountered was the receptionist. She was a woman in her 40s, with a sharp expression and a voice that carried more authority than Aisha had expected from someone at the front desk. As Aisha approached, the receptionist barely looked up from her computer screen. She didn't greet her with a smile or a nod. Instead, she squinted slightly, and in a tone that dripped with judgment, she asked what Aisha wanted. "I have an appointment with the board," Aisha said calmly. "My name is Aisha." The receptionist's eyes flicked over her briefly, then returned to the screen. "Do you really think this is the right place for someone like you?" she asked, her words low but cutting. There was a sneer in her voice that made Aisha freeze for a moment. It wasn't an outright insult at first, but the implication was clear. The receptionist assumed Aisha didn't belong, that she was somehow out of place, and that she should feel grateful just to be there. Aisha felt heat rise in her chest. She had dealt with discrimination and prejudice before, but it never got easier, especially when it came from someone who had no idea who she was or what she could do. She reminded herself to stay composed. There was no reason to stoop to the receptionist's level. She took another deep breath and replied politely, "I'm here for a meeting with the board. Could you please let them know I've arrived?" The receptionist let out a sigh, loud enough for Aisha to hear. "I don't know why anyone like you would be here," she muttered, but loud enough that a few people waiting nearby glanced over. Her eyes narrowed as she added, "Maybe you should check somewhere else first. This isn't really a place for people like you." Aisha felt a mix of anger and disbelief, but she held herself steady. She realized that her reaction in this moment was crucial. If she reacted with anger, the receptionist would feel justified in her prejudice. If she withdrew or showed fear, it would confirm the receptionist's assumptions. Aisha straightened her back and smiled politely, though her mind was racing. She said nothing more, only waited, letting the receptionist's words hang in the air. The people around them seemed uncomfortable. A few glanced at Aisha with sympathy, but no one spoke up. Aisha felt a pang of frustration. Why was it always the same? Why did people feel safe being rude when they assumed no one in power was watching? She reminded herself that she was not here to prove anything to the receptionist. She was here to make a difference, to show what leadership and competence looked like, and to transform spaces where ignorance and prejudice were allowed to fester. After a moment that felt much longer than it was, the receptionist finally picked up the phone and called someone in the back. Aisha watched silently, her calm demeanor masking the storm inside her. She noticed small details around the office, the framed certificates on the wall, the way the staff moved with a sense of routine, the slightly tense atmosphere that hinted at underlying issues in the company. Everything she observed would be important later. Even though she had been insulted, she saw this as an opportunity to understand the culture she might one day change. As she waited, she tried to calm her thoughts. She pictured herself walking through the office with confidence, meeting everyone, learning about the company, and then making the changes she knew were necessary. She imagined turning the environment into a place where respect was mandatory, and prejudice could no longer hide behind ignorance. The receptionist had no idea who she was, but that would soon change. Aisha could feel a sense of purpose growing stronger with every passing second. Finally, the receptionist gestured for her to sit in one of the waiting chairs. "I'll let them know you're here," she said, her tone neutral, though her eyes still carried a hint of judgment. Aisha sat down, keeping her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She allowed herself a brief glance around the lobby, observing the staff, the layout, and the subtle interactions between people. Every detail mattered. She made mental notes about the way employees addressed one another, how approachable the management seemed, and how the receptionist's behavior set the tone for the entire office. Minutes passed slowly, each second stretching as the receptionist continued typing and occasionally muttering under her breath. Aisha felt a mix of impatience and determination. She reminded herself that this was a test, not of her ability to handle insults, but of her ability to maintain composure, to read situations carefully, and to plan her next move. She had learned through experience that the first impression might be flawed, but the lasting impression came from actions, not words. While waiting, Aisha thought about her journey to this point. She had grown up facing challenges that tested her character. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and sometimes outright ignored because of who she was. But she had learned resilience, patience, and the importance of focusing on the bigger picture. Those lessons were now more valuable than ever. The receptionist's insults, though hurtful, were nothing compared to the challenges she had already overcome. They were small ripples in the vast ocean of her ambitions. Aisha also thought about the people who might be watching this scene unfold. Perhaps some were quietly judging the receptionist, realizing her behavior was unacceptable. Perhaps others were silently hoping for change, wishing someone with the courage and vision to transform the office would appear. Aisha understood that leadership was not just about making decisions behind closed doors. It was about setting an example, showing integrity, and standing firm even when confronted with ignorance. After what seemed like an eternity, a man appeared from a back office looking surprised to see Aisha waiting. "I apologize for the delay," he said warmly. "Please follow me. The board is ready to meet you." Aisha rose gracefully, giving a polite nod to the receptionist who had underestimated her. The receptionist's expression shifted slightly, but Aisha didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. She walked confidently, knowing that this was her moment to begin turning a page. As she followed the man down the corridor, Aisha felt a sense of quiet triumph. The initial insult no longer mattered. What mattered now was the opportunity ahead, the chance to demonstrate her skills and the potential to change an entire office culture from within. She felt a surge of energy and purpose, knowing that she would not let anyone's ignorance define her or limit what she could achieve. Inside, Aisha imagined the possibilities. She imagined turning a rigid, outdated environment into a space where respect and equality were the foundation. She imagined mentoring employees, restructuring the office, and creating opportunities for people who, like her, had been underestimated or dismissed. Every insult, every doubt cast by others became fuel for her determination. The receptionist had no idea that the woman she had insulted would soon have the power to change everything in that office. When she finally entered the boardroom, she was greeted with polite smiles and handshakes. The room was filled with professionals who expected to see a client, not someone who might one day lead their company. Aisha's calm and composed demeanor immediately set her apart. She knew that the first impression would soon shift completely, from being underestimated to being respected. She was ready to step into her role, not just as a visitor or a client, but as a future leader who would transform everything in ways no one had yet imagined. The receptionist remained behind her desk, unaware of the storm of change about to unfold. Aisha's mind, focused and determined, was already planning her approach, thinking about how she would introduce herself, how she would gain the trust of the board, and how she would turn the environment into one of respect, fairness, and opportunity. She smiled quietly to herself, knowing that patience, strategy, and resilience would guide her through the challenges ahead. Aisha had faced prejudice before, and she had faced doubt. But this time, she held the power to not just overcome it, but to change the very system that allowed it to exist. She stepped fully into the room, her head held high, her heart steady, and her mind ready to take the first step toward a future she had long imagined. The receptionist's insults had not broken her spirit. They had strengthened it. And Aisha knew deep inside that this was only the beginning. The room fell quiet for a moment as Aisha stood near the reception desk, still holding her small folder close to her chest. The receptionist's tone had been sharp, filled with an attitude that suggested she didn't belong there. A few people in the waiting area had noticed the exchange but looked away quickly, pretending to focus on their phones or the magazines in their hands. Aisha didn't say much. She had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, at least not in that moment. She simply gave a polite smile, though her heart felt heavy. The receptionist leaned back in her chair, her expression showing impatience. She asked Aisha again whom she was there to see, her tone dripping with condescension. Aisha gave the name of the company's board member she had the appointment with. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, as if doubting that was even possible. She muttered under her breath about people showing up without understanding where they are. Aisha stayed calm. Her years of experience had taught her how to handle situations where people made quick judgments. She knew who she was and she knew her purpose. This was not the first time someone had looked at her and assumed less. But something about the receptionist's tone stung more than usual. It wasn't just rudeness. It was the complete disbelief that someone like Aisha could belong in a place like this. The receptionist finally picked up the phone to call upstairs, her voice softening instantly as she spoke to someone higher up. Aisha noticed the shift in tone and couldn't help but reflect on how quickly people changed their behavior based on status. It was something she had observed many times in her career. When the call ended, the receptionist told her she could wait but gave her a look that clearly said she didn't expect her to stay long. While waiting, Aisha glanced around the office lobby. The place looked elegant but outdated. Expensive paintings, polished marble floors, and glass walls that somehow made the space feel cold instead of welcoming. The atmosphere reflected an old mindset, one that prioritized appearance over warmth. She could see the staff behind the glass walls working quietly, most of them avoiding eye contact with visitors. It was the kind of place where people followed rules but didn't necessarily feel valued. As she waited, a few employees walked past. One or two gave her polite smiles, but most barely looked at her. Aisha observed quietly, noting how the receptionist interacted differently with other visitors. When a man in a suit arrived, the receptionist's whole demeanor changed. Her voice was cheerful, her smile wide, her tone respectful. Aisha noticed it, but she didn't let it bother her too much. She reminded herself of her purpose again. She wasn't here for validation. She was here to assess the company, to see whether it was worth taking on, and to understand what needed to change if she became part of it. After what felt like a long wait, an assistant came down from the elevator. He greeted Aisha warmly and apologized for the delay. He gestured for her to follow him upstairs. As she walked past the receptionist, she caught a glimpse of her face, confused, maybe even slightly embarrassed. Aisha gave a polite nod before stepping into the elevator. Inside the elevator, the assistant chatted politely about the company and how the team was excited to meet her. Aisha listened carefully, her mind replaying the events from just moments ago. She couldn't shake off the receptionist's words, but she didn't let them sour her mood. She'd learned to turn moments like that into motivation. Every act of disrespect reminded her why she worked so hard to break barriers and open doors for others who came after her. When the elevator doors opened, Aisha stepped into a very different environment. The upper floor was brighter, more open, and filled with positive energy. People smiled as she walked past, and the staff seemed genuinely busy but comfortable. It was a contrast to the tension she'd felt downstairs. The assistant led her to a large conference room where several executives were already waiting. They stood to greet her, offering handshakes and warm smiles. The contrast between how she was treated upstairs and downstairs was striking. As she took her seat, Aisha began to introduce herself and explain her background. The executives listened closely, impressed by her experience and calm confidence. She spoke about her previous projects, her focus on innovation, and how she believed in building company cultures that valued people as much as profits. Her voice carried both authority and warmth, the kind of balance that made people pay attention. One of the board members leaned forward, clearly impressed. He asked her about her thoughts on company culture and what she looked for when evaluating a business. Aisha smiled slightly. She had been waiting for that question. She spoke about how she believed that true success started with respect for clients, employees, and everyone who walked through the doors. She explained that companies with toxic or dismissive cultures always struggled in the long term, no matter how profitable they appeared. As she talked, some of the board members nodded, clearly agreeing. Others seemed thoughtful, realizing perhaps for the first time that the company they led might need more change than they had admitted. Aisha could see the potential in their eyes, potential for growth, for transformation, and for something better. Meanwhile, downstairs, the receptionist continued her day as usual, unaware of what was happening above. She still believed Aisha was some unimportant visitor or job applicant who had overstayed her welcome. She didn't realize that the same woman she had insulted was now sitting with the company's decision-makers, discussing strategies that could shape the future of the entire business. Back in the meeting, Aisha continued to share her ideas. She didn't just talk about numbers or goals, she talked about people. She emphasized how employees thrived when they felt respected and heard. She talked about leadership that listened rather than dictated, about environments where teamwork replaced fear. Her words were grounded in experience, not theory. Everyone in the room could feel the sincerity behind them. By the time the meeting ended, the executives were clearly impressed. They thanked her for her insights and mentioned how refreshing it was to hear someone focus on both human values and business success. As she stood to leave, one of them asked if she would consider taking on a leadership role in the company. They said they believed she could bring the kind of transformation the organization needed. Aisha smiled politely, saying she would consider it after reviewing more details. She didn't show excitement or surprise. She had learned to stay calm even in big moments. When the meeting ended, the assistant escorted her back downstairs. As the elevator doors opened again, the receptionist looked up, surprise flashing across her face. The assistant spoke to Aisha with respect, thanking her again for her time and saying he would send over the documents she had requested. The receptionist's expression shifted from arrogance to confusion, her eyes darting between Aisha and the assistant. It was clear she was trying to piece together who Aisha really was. Aisha didn't say a word about what had happened earlier. She simply gave the receptionist a calm, polite smile, the same kind of smile that carried quiet strength. She thanked the assistant and walked out of the building, her posture tall and confident. Once outside, Aisha took a deep breath. The city air was cool, and she could feel the weight of the morning lifting. She thought about how many times people had judged her based on appearance or assumptions, and how, time and time again, she had proven them wrong not through confrontation, but through excellence. She knew that her actions and results would always speak louder than prejudice ever could. That evening, Aisha sat in her apartment reflecting on the day. She made a few notes in her planner, summarizing her impressions of the company. She wrote about the professionalism of the executives, the potential for growth, and the toxic undertone she sensed in parts of the organization. She mentioned how first impressions were powerful, and how one person at the front desk could set the tone for every visitor who walked through the door. She paused for a moment, thinking about the receptionist. A small part of her wondered if that woman realized the mistake she had made. But Aisha also knew that people like her didn't change easily, unless something forced them to reflect. She didn't hold anger toward her. She had long since learned that ignorance wasn't worth her peace. What mattered now was what she would do next. Aisha smiled to herself as she closed her notebook. She already knew what she wanted to do. She wasn't just going to lead this company. She was going to change it from the ground up. She wanted to create a place where no one, no matter their race, background, or appearance, would ever be made to feel small the way she had that morning. The thought gave her a sense of purpose that felt bigger than the insult she had endured. This wasn't just about a rude receptionist. It was about transformation, about building something better for the future. Aisha knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she was ready. The next morning, she received a call from one of the board members, offering her a leadership position officially. She accepted with quiet confidence, her voice steady and warm. The receptionist downstairs still had no idea what kind of change was coming. Change that would soon redefine not just the company, but her own life as well. Aisha hung up the phone, smiled softly, and whispered to herself, "Let's begin." The boardroom was larger than Aisha had imagined. Tall windows allowed sunlight to pour in, reflecting off the polished wooden table that stretched almost the length of the room. Chairs were neatly arranged around it, each one waiting for someone to take a seat and participate in the decisions that shaped the company. The walls were adorned with framed awards, certificates, and photographs that told stories of past successes. Aisha noticed each detail quietly, understanding that every object, Every decoration had meaning and influence. The board members were seated, a mix of men and women, all in formal attire, their expressions ranging from polite curiosity to subtle skepticism. Aisha had learned over the years to read people. She could tell that some of them were expecting someone competent but unremarkable, someone who would listen, nod, and leave. They were unprepared for the energy and vision she brought into the room. Aisha took a deep breath, walking to the front of the room. Her calm yet confident presence immediately drew attention. She smiled warmly, greeting each board member with a firm handshake, her eyes making contact with each person. In that moment, she knew that her first impression had shifted. No one could see the sting of the receptionist's words. They only saw a poised, intelligent woman ready to share her ideas. "Thank you for meeting with me today," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here to learn about your company, understand its strengths, and explore ways to grow while creating an environment where everyone feels valued and respected." The board members exchanged glances. Some were intrigued, some cautious. A few took out notepads, ready to write down her observations. Aisha didn't mind the scrutiny. She was used to it. She had spent years presenting ideas, leading teams, and transforming organizations. She understood that her success depended not just on what she said, but how she made others feel while listening, observing, and acting. She started by asking questions about the company's goals, its challenges, and its culture. The board responded, sharing insights about operations growth and past initiatives. As they spoke, Aisha listened carefully, taking mental notes. She noticed patterns, the ways in which certain employees were overlooked, the subtle hierarchies that went unchallenged, and the lack of support for new ideas. She also recognized the company's strengths: talented people, a loyal client base, and untapped potential that could be unlocked with thoughtful leadership. Throughout the meeting, Aisha spoke with clarity and purpose. She offered suggestions that were both practical and innovative. She proposed strategies for improving workflow, increasing employee engagement, and expanding market reach. Her ideas were grounded in experience but presented in a way that was fresh and compelling. The board members leaned forward, listening intently, asking questions and challenging her assumptions. Aisha welcomed their questions. She knew that meaningful discussion often led to the strongest solutions. At one point, she paused and addressed the subtle dynamics she had observed. "I've noticed that sometimes talented employees feel unheard," she said gently. "I believe that creating a culture where everyone's voice matters not only improves morale, but also drives innovation. People perform better when they know they are respected and valued." Her words were met with nods, some hesitant, some enthusiastic. She continued, detailing specific initiatives that could improve communication, teamwork, and inclusivity. Her approach was not about criticism, it was about transformation. She painted a vision of a company that could thrive economically, while also being a place where people felt proud to work. As the meeting progressed, Aisha sensed a shift in the room. The board members who had initially been skeptical began to see her differently. Her calm confidence, her thoughtful insights, and her ability to listen and respond with empathy had earned their respect. They realized that she was not just another consultant or visitor. She was someone who could guide the company toward a brighter, more successful future. Meanwhile, the receptionist had no idea who Aisha was. She assumed that the meeting was just another routine appointment, that this woman was someone seeking advice or information. She continued with her tasks, unaware that the person she had insulted and dismissed had just captivated the entire boardroom. Her earlier judgment now seemed insignificant, but she had no way of knowing the impact of her words. The meeting ended with a sense of excitement. The board members were genuinely impressed, discussing ideas and plans more openly than they had in months. They asked Aisha to stay on for a follow-up meeting the next day, eager to explore her vision further. It was clear that she had made a strong impression, and the potential for real change was beginning to take shape. After the boardroom, Aisha took a moment to reflect. She had faced prejudice, ignorance, and disrespect earlier that morning, yet she had not allowed it to derail her focus. She had used the experience to fuel her determination, to observe carefully, and to act with purpose. She realized that leadership was not about proving people wrong in the moment. It was about creating change that spoke for itself. The receptionist, still at her desk, had no clue that Aisha would soon be more than just a visitor. She had no idea that the woman she had insulted would have the authority to reshape the company entirely. Aisha's calm exterior hid a mind that was already planning the next steps: how to implement meaningful changes, how to empower employees, and how to foster a culture of respect and inclusion. As Aisha left the office, she felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. She knew that the work ahead would be challenging, that some people would resist change, and that old habits could be difficult to break. But she also knew that she had the skills, the experience, and the determination to make a difference. Every insult, every moment of doubt from others became fuel for her mission. She understood that transformation required patience, strategy, and empathy, and she was ready for the challenge. That evening, as she walked through the city streets, Aisha reflected on the events of the day. She thought about the receptionist, the board members, and the office culture she had just observed. She smiled quietly to herself, knowing that change was possible. She imagined a workplace where everyone was treated fairly, where respect was the standard, and where talent was recognized and nurtured regardless of background. She could see the ripple effects of her future leadership, not just in this office but in the lives of every employee who would feel valued and empowered. Aisha also considered her own journey. She had faced many obstacles, and she had learned that resilience was not just about enduring challenges, it was about transforming them into opportunities. She had learned to stay calm in the face of disrespect, to observe carefully, and to act decisively when the moment was right. She had learned that leadership was not about showing anger or seeking revenge. It was about creating systems, environments, and cultures that reflected fairness, integrity, and vision. The next morning, Aisha returned to the office, her mind focused and her energy renewed. She knew that her role was evolving even before any formal title had been given. She understood that influence was not always granted by position. It could be earned through insight, respect, and action. She greeted the receptionist politely, who this time gave a neutral nod, unaware that Aisha was on the verge of stepping into a position of power that would allow her to transform the office from the inside out. Aisha's interactions with other employees were equally revealing. She listened carefully to their experiences, noting both their frustrations and their aspirations. She recognized the untapped potential in the people around her, understanding that real change required not just new policies, but also inspiring confidence and motivation in every individual. She began forming a vision in her mind, not just for the company's growth but for its cultural transformation, ensuring that respect, fairness, and opportunity were at the center of everything. By the end of the second day, it became clear to the board that Aisha was someone extraordinary. Her intelligence, empathy, and ability to think strategically impressed them deeply. They began to discuss ways to bring her on board in a leadership capacity, realizing that her insights were too valuable to ignore. Aisha had not yet officially assumed any formal title, but her influence was already evident, quietly reshaping the attitudes and perspectives within the office. Meanwhile, the receptionist continued her routine, still unaware of the full scope of Aisha's abilities and the changes that were about to come. The contrast between the woman she had dismissed and the impact Aisha was having on the company could not have been greater. It was a lesson in humility, one that would become more evident in the days to follow. By the end of the week, Aisha had established herself as a force to be reckoned with. The board was eager to explore her recommendations in depth, and employees began to see the beginnings of a cultural shift. Aisha's presence alone had started to change the office environment. She had proven that competence, insight, and empathy could command respect far more effectively than anger or confrontation ever could. She also reflected on her own growth. Aisha realized that moments of prejudice, insults, or doubt were not barriers. They were opportunities to demonstrate resilience and to lead by example. She understood that real leadership required patience, observation, and strategic action, and she was prepared to use Aisha's first day as the official leader of the company began quietly, but her presence was immediately noticeable. Employees who had once moved through the office with routine indifference now paid attention. They could sense that change was coming, even if they weren't entirely sure what it would look like. Aisha walked with confidence, her steps measured, her head held high. She greeted everyone she passed, not with forced formality, but with genuine warmth. People noticed the difference immediately, and the energy in the office began to shift. Her first order of business was understanding the full scope of the company. She spent hours reviewing documents, analyzing reports, and talking to employees across departments. She asked questions not only about profits and strategies, but also about people, how they felt, what challenges they faced, and what opportunities they saw for improvement. Employees who had felt overlooked or unheard began to open up, sharing frustrations and ideas they had long held back. Aisha listened carefully, making mental notes about how the office operated, where the gaps were, and what changes would have the most immediate and meaningful impact. The receptionist, who had once insulted Aisha without knowing her identity, was still there at her desk. She had noticed the subtle shift in the office's energy, though she did not yet understand why. People no longer ignored her, and there was a new sense of order and respect in the air. Aisha, aware of the receptionist's past behavior, decided to address it, but in her own calm and measured way. She believed that leadership was not about punishment. It was about guidance, accountability, and the opportunity for growth. Aisha called the receptionist into her office. The woman entered, slightly hesitant, unsure of what to expect. Aisha offered her a seat and spoke kindly, though firmly. "I want to talk about how we interact with visitors and clients," she began. "It's important that everyone feels welcome and respected here. We all have a responsibility to create an environment where people are treated fairly, regardless of their background." The receptionist's expression shifted from defensiveness to a mix of guilt and surprise. She realized slowly that the woman in front of her, the same woman she had dismissed and insulted, was now in a position of authority over her. She did not know what to say at first, and Aisha allowed the silence to speak volumes. Then she continued, "I believe in giving people the chance to learn and improve. This office should reflect that. Moving forward, we are going to make sure that respect is at the center of everything we do." The receptionist nodded, swallowing hard. She had no choice but to listen, and Aisha's calm demeanor left no room for argument. In that moment, the receptionist understood that the dynamics of the office were changing, and that her behavior could no longer go unchecked. Aisha's approach was not about revenge. It was about setting standards and ensuring that the office culture aligned with values of fairness, respect, and professionalism. Aisha then turned her attention to the employees. She organized meetings with each department, not as an outsider evaluating them, but as a leader who wanted to understand their experiences, frustrations, and ideas. People were initially cautious, unsure if her interest was genuine. But as she listened, asked thoughtful questions, and acknowledged their contributions, they began to open up. They shared challenges that had gone unaddressed for years: miscommunication, favoritism, and a lack of opportunity for growth. Aisha took careful notes, identifying patterns that needed immediate attention. She implemented small but meaningful changes first. Schedules were adjusted to reduce stress, communication channels were clarified, and opportunities for collaboration were encouraged. Employees who had felt invisible began to feel seen. People started sharing ideas and taking initiative, knowing that their voices mattered. The atmosphere shifted subtly but noticeably. Laughter returned to the break room, conversations became more open, and the once tense air of the office began to lighten. Aisha also focused on leadership development. She mentored team leaders, helping them understand how to guide their teams with empathy and fairness. She emphasized the importance of accountability, not just for mistakes, but for actions that could either help or harm the office culture. Slowly, the ripple effect of her leadership began to touch everyone. People who had once been passive observers now became active participants in improving the workplace. The receptionist, observing all of this, felt a mixture of emotions. She had underestimated Aisha, and now she realized just how wrong she had been. The woman she had insulted had transformed the office culture in ways she could never have imagined. It was humbling, and it sparked reflection. She began to adjust her own behavior, realizing that respect and professionalism were not optional. They were expected. Aisha's leadership forced everyone, including the receptionist, to confront their assumptions and adapt. Aisha's focus was not on punishment or humiliation. She believed that people could learn and grow if given guidance and accountability. She spoke with employees privately when necessary, encouraging them to improve and praising them when they did. This approach built trust even with those who had initially been resistant. The office began to operate with a new sense of purpose, where respect was the standard and collaboration was valued over competition or favoritism. In the weeks that followed, the changes became more visible. Employees who had once been hesitant to speak up now contributed ideas in meetings. Teams collaborated more effectively, sharing knowledge and resources freely. Morale improved, and with it, productivity increased. Clients noticed the difference as well. Interactions were smoother, communications clearer, and service more consistent. The company's reputation began to grow, reflecting not just the quality of its products and services, but the culture that Aisha had cultivated. Aisha also addressed structural issues within the company. She reorganized teams to better align with their strengths, introduced new systems for workflow efficiency, and implemented policies that encouraged fairness and transparency. She made it clear that discrimination, bias, or disrespect of any kind would no longer be tolerated. Her approach was firm but fair, and the employees began to see the positive impact almost immediately. The receptionist, still adjusting to these changes, gradually began to participate in the new culture. She observed how Aisha treated people with respect and fairness, even those who had made mistakes. Over time, she began to adopt some of these behaviors herself. The shift was not instant, but the office environment demanded adaptation, and Aisha's consistent example made change inevitable. Aisha also prioritized communication. She held weekly meetings where employees could share successes, challenges, and ideas openly. She encouraged transparency, making it clear that everyone's voice mattered. By creating a safe space for dialogue, she fostered a sense of belonging and empowerment among her team. People felt valued, and that sense of value translated into increased engagement and commitment. The transformation of the office culture was remarkable. Where tension and fear had once dominated, there was now collaboration and motivation. Employees who had felt overlooked now received recognition for their contributions. Problems that had gone unresolved for years were addressed, and new solutions were implemented efficiently. Aisha's leadership proved that respect, fairness, and strategic thinking could create a thriving environment for both people and business. Throughout all of this, Aisha never lost sight of her original goal. She had endured the receptionist's insult, faced skepticism from others, and entered a space that was resistant to change. Yet she had used those experiences to guide her approach, to observe carefully and to act decisively. She understood that true leadership was not about ego or revenge. It was about creating lasting impact, building trust and transforming systems in a way that benefited everyone. As months passed, the office continued to flourish under her guidance. Employee satisfaction improved, client relationships strengthened, and the company's overall performance reached new heights. Aisha had become more than a leader. She had become a symbol of integrity, resilience, and vision. The receptionist, who had once insulted her, had been forced to recognize the consequences of disrespect and adjust her behavior accordingly. The transformation was not just about policies or processes. It was about people. Aisha had shown that even the smallest acts of disrespect could be addressed, that prejudice could be challenged with composure and strategy, and that a workplace could thrive when respect was the foundation. Employees learned from her example, understanding that leadership was about action, empathy, and accountability. By the end of Part 4, it was clear that Aisha's presence had fundamentally changed the company. What had started as a personal encounter with prejudice had become an opportunity to reshape an entire organization. The receptionist, along with every other employee, had been part of this journey. Aisha had taken the challenge she faced and turned it into a catalyst for positive change. Her leadership had created an environment where everyone felt valued, respected, and empowered, and the company was stronger as a result. Aisha knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she also knew that she had the ability, vision, and determination to face them. She had turned a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for growth. not just for herself but for everyone around her. At the